Okay, so let me just kickstart the session, right? Those of you guys who just joined, if you have any chat requests, just feel free to type them under the questions chat. So just a quick introduction of myself. I'm Li Xing. So if you're watching a recording of this, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, right? At the same time, if you're with us live right now, if you have any questions, just type it under the respective chat box, right? If you're with us via Zoom or if you're with us via the app. So just a quick disclaimer before we kickstart the session, right? The information presented here is not to be treated as investment advice. It's for educational purposes only. So this is the agenda that we will be covering for today, right? So first we will take a look at the key economic events. So for that, right, we will hop onto the economic calendar. So this would be using either Forex Factory or even Vantage Economic Calendar, right? So the main difference is that for Forex Factory, we are seeing just the majors, right? Whereas on Vantage Market, it offers not just the majors, but you have the emerging market currencies as well. So that will be the first thing that we will do, right? And following which we will be taking a look at our setups. So for today, I'll be covering mainly on gold as well as dollar index. So those are the main ones. And of course, right, along the way, right, we are open for Q&A. So throughout, if you guys have any questions or if you have any charts that you want us to go through, just feel free to type them under the chat box or Q&A box. So yeah, before we look at our trade setups, right? So before we hop on to our trading view chart, let's just take a look at that. Hi, Jamilu, right? Good evening to you too. Okay, so thanks for being here with us, right? It's great to have you as always. Okay, so with that, right, let's hop on to our charts. So if you guys have any chart requests, just type it under the chat box. So let me just bring this up. Okay, so I hope that you are seeing my screen. Right, so this is the economic calendar on Forex Factory. So usually what I will do is that I'll just filter it according to the high and medium impact news events, right? So these are the ones where we would probably see more volatility in the market, right? So you can see that coming up, right, we have on dollar would be on the durable goods orders, right? And the higher impact ones would mainly be around CPI data for the Eurozone. You have your German as well as Spain CPI data. Right, so those are the main ones. And of course, GDP for dollar, right? So this GDP data and unemployment claims would give more insights as to how the economy is performing and whether we will be seeing more rate hikes going forward, right? Potentially. So those are the main ones, right? And the latest news, Fed seems to still adopt a hawkish tone. That's probably also why we're seeing such strength in the dollar. So that's one, right? Another economic calendar you can consider, right, would be the Vantage Markets economic calendar. So just go to vantagemarkets.com under the Education and Tools tab. Click on economic calendar. So for this, right, you can see that this would not be just the majors, right? We have the emerging market currencies as well. So again, right, you can look at the impact of the news events depending on the color that they have here. Right? So the higher impact ones are usually the ones in red and yellow. And yeah, those are the main ones. So we also have EIA crude oil stocks change data coming up. Okay, so now that we have covered the main ones, you can see that at least for today, right, key events coming up would be mainly around the dollar as well as euro, right? So those are the main ones, at least for these 2 days or today, right? And then following which, right, we will take a look at our setup. So for this, let's hop on to our charts. So I'm just going to bring the charts here. Right, so on the charts, you can see that this is currently where we are right now. So let me just bring that up. Okay, so as always, right, let's cover on dollar index first. So if you take a look at where we are on dollar index, right, on the higher time frame, we have two things. We can see that price came into this resistance turn support area, we're seeing a strong move, right? So this is on the monthly time frame, which means that one candle itself represents the movement within a month. So essentially, these areas that we're seeing, right, these zones, they are respected. Let's say if you have two candles that respected this region, right, essentially it means that price stayed within that region for a period of 2 months, right? So that's pretty significant as compared to the lower time frames. So if you take a look at it on the monthly, right, we have this resistance area, which price tested. We see the huge rejection to the downside before it broke and closed to the upside. And right now we're seeing that consolidation before price continues higher. So on the monthly, it's sitting on the support region over here. And when we move down to the lower time frame, right, previously we marked this high, which is the monthly high as well as a potential target. If you take a look at this high, which prices currently surpassed this zone. Now, with that in mind, right, if we zoom in to this leg, so you can see that when price starts coming into this support region, right, it pushes into this support zone. If you move down to the weekly time frame, you can see that this whole zone that price did a pullback, right, and also breaking above this high, you can see this whole region, it's in a bullish market structure. So prices were forming, or it's still forming, right, higher lows and higher highs. So one thing about bullish market structure, right, so we covered it quite extensively in other sessions. The idea is that two things, right? One, it's that we can see the lows are generally not violated. It's not broken in a bullish trend, whereas the highs can be used as potential profit targets, right? So those are potential areas that we can see price run into or potentially breaking this zone. So we see this characteristic being shown here. You can see again higher lows and higher highs, just looking at the candles highs and lows. That's one, right? And with respect to the most recent price movements, you can see where we were, right? Previously, we highlighted this region, which was a resistance and support area. We saw price again pushing up and a strong rejection of this region. And following that, price broke and closed to the upside. So this is where we were last week, right? You can see that price broke and closed to the upside. So this was the nearest support area with respect to where prices are currently developing here. And so with this in mind, you can see that price came in, right, and it pushed up, hitting this high over here. So this is where we are right now on the weekly time frame. Now, if we're just taking a look at the most recent price movements, you can see that depending on how this week closed, right, prices are still in a bullish structure, right? At least where we are here, if you take a look at this whole movement here, right, prices are still forming higher lows and higher highs. We have a high that price came into, right? But a big part of it, again, is dependent on how this week closed, right? But there's no indication, at least on the weekly, right? You can see this bullish market structure still holds, right? So that's on the weekly time frame. If we move down to the daily time frame, on the daily, we're pretty much seeing the same pattern as well, right? So essentially, again, higher lows and higher highs. You can see this whole move that we're having here. And so one thing to note about this is that on the weekly, right, so we have a high that we highlighted as a potential target. You can see that price went beyond that. So what we're looking out for now is that if we do see, if I shrink this across, you can see that there's this zone that we're seeing here, right? Essentially this area, if I put these levels on the weekly time frame, or even putting these levels in close, you can see that there's this, again, the horizontal line I can draw across, which price actually reacted or interacted with as a support twice, and then eventually failing this zone as a resistance. And currently this is where it's testing. So right now, the thought process behind this is that if price continues, right, on the lower time frame, it still shows bullish structure, right? There's a high chance that it will continue breaking this zone altogether, right? That's one, right? The alternative is that if price starts consolidating within this zone, creating potential low, right, on the short-term time frame, we're seeing that bearish market structure comes in, we could see a potential pullback. So those are the two main ones, right, on dollar index right now. So let's take a look at the lower time frames. So with that in mind, right, let's just move to the lower time frames, right? Let's see on the daily. You can see on the daily, right, still bullish, right? Prices are again and forming higher lows and higher highs. There's no change in that, right? If we take a look at where we are on the daily in terms of the support zone, right? Let me just remove all this structure, right? So all this areas. So if you take a look at it on the daily, you can see that this is the daily candle pushing into a potential resistance region. But if you're on the daily again, right, there we need to see a change in market structure before there's confirmation of further move to the downside. So that is not indicated yet on the daily time frame. Now, if I move to the 4 hours time frame, we can pretty much see the same things, right? So on the 4 hours, the last support region that we have comes in over here. You can see that this was an area which price tested previously, right? We see this strong region that price tested as a resistance. You're seeing this again, higher lows and higher highs. Price broke to the upside, creating this region as a potential support, right? And as long as price holds within this leg, right, at least this whole move, this is still bullish. So we could see a potential pullback targeting the high, right? And if price decides to break, right, from here, we'll see that change in market structure following this bullish move. Okay, so if we're on the 4 hours, right, this is the last support region that we have, which is really this area here, right? I can put this in a different color. Let me just put this, let's say, in blue. So this is the whole move to the upside. We have the low and the high. So this is the impulsive move, right? If we do see a potential pullback, this is one support region that we can look at. With that in mind, right, if price does a pullback from here, you can see that again, right, on the lower time frame, this whole pullback, prices would have to be pushing lower in order to reach this support zone, right? So in that case, what will be seen on the lower time frames, it's again lower lows and lower highs. So you'll see this, right, before price does the change in market structure. Now, if we take a look at the previous pullback, right, so let's say, for example, like this region, right, so you can see that price broke to the upside, did a pullback, right? So let's focus on this whole leg. This is just to illustrate the whole bearish market structure on the lower time frame. So if you notice any pullback leg on the higher time frame, let's say on the 4 hours, right, we are noticing this slight pullback. If I move down to the lower time frame, be it the 1 hour or even lower, right, to the 15 minutes, what we can see here, you can see that again, there's a bearish market structure. So this whole leg that caused the pullback, like we have highlighted earlier, this whole leg, right, if you take a look at it in close, or even if you take a look at it in terms of the candlestick charts, what we notice here is that you can see again lower lows and lower highs. So to the downside, you can see the highs and lows, right? So this is the last high that we have that broke the structure. You can see this is the last high that caused the break to the downside. So the idea is that with every pullback, right, this is likely, we could see this continue, right? Price could mitigate further into a demand area, but the confirmation really comes in when price starts breaking and closing to the upside. So this is the last high that we have, right? So if price breaks and close above this, right, then it shows that it's in line with the higher time frames trend, which is more bullish. Right, so if you take a look at it, right, on the 15 minutes, you can see that the break and close really comes in here. So beyond this candle. And following that, what happens? Price broke and closed to the upside, and it came back in to test this region again over here, right? So this area following the break and close to the upside before it continues higher. Now, in terms of the target, right, every high that caused a pullback, right, in a bullish structure, we talked about this in terms of how when we have a bullish market structure, the high can be used as a potential target. So in terms of how we can apply this concept, you can see that this is the high, right? So when we see the lower time frame starts changing market structure, right, this is a potential high that we can target. So this high. Of course, beyond that, you can see that price went a lot further than that, right? That will be dependent on the higher time frame as well. But this is the higher, and beyond that, you can see that if this structure doesn't change, right, prices are again forming higher lows and higher highs. You can see that in this move, right, the lows are not broken. So just highlighting the highs and lows here. So that's what we have on dollar index, right? At the moment, if you take a look at it on the 1 hour or even the 4 hours time frame, this is really where we are right now. So we are still in a bullish market structure, at least on the 4 hours, right? So if we do see any signs of pullback into a demand area here, again, right, if we see a pullback, this creates a potential high as a target, right? And of course, this pullback, it will be forming lower lows and lower highs. The change in market structure will be a sign that we could be seeing this high that caused the pullback being targeted. So that's on dollar index, right? So with that, let's take a look at our other setups, right? So another setup that we have would be on euro dollar. So let's take a look at that, right? So if we take a look at where euro dollar is, right, on the lower time frames, you can see that this whole move, it's still bearish. If you take a look at it on the monthly, we have this monthly low. So let me just remove all of this, right? So we have a monthly low previously that was a potential target. Why? Right? If you take a look at this whole move, we have this, right? So if I put this levels, you can see higher highs and higher lows. So in a bullish structure, higher highs, higher lows. And notice what we have here, right? Beyond that, we can see this is the last high here. Now, again, if we're in a bullish market structure, the highs, right, would be broken generally, right? And the lows are not violated. So that's the idea. But you can see what happens when price starts coming in to test this resistance area. On the monthly, right, so notice this high, we see a wick above this region, but it did not actually close above it, right? So we see a wick to the downside and this strong pullback. And this, when price did not close above this high, right, it creates this low which caused the pullback, right? This low as a potential target, which we can see that price went way beyond it. And so if you attend the earlier sessions as well, you can see that on the lower time frames, right, this whole structure, it's very bearish. If you take a look at it on the weekly, the daily, you can see that prices, just looking at the most recent candles, right, it's forming lower lows and lower highs. You can see this whole movement. So price did a pullback, and all these wicks, right, just represents a pullback on the lower time frame before it continues in the direction of the weekly trend. So that's where we are right now, right? So on the weekly time frame, I do want to highlight this, right? So just looking at this whole move, sorry, before that, right? So on the monthly, we have two regions, right? One, it's this area, which we're seeing that pullback. So you can see this zone, right? This is a potential region over here. And so that's on the monthly time frame. We could see something like a small bounce, right? Depending, pushing back into a resistance region again, right? So a lot of it is dependent on the lower time frame. Now let's take a look at the weekly time frame. So if you take a look at the weekly, right? Currently what we have here, this whole move to the downside, this is still bearish, right? You can see lower lows, lower highs to the downside. We're seeing a potential test of this zone, but as to whether we will see an acknowledgement of this area, right, a lot of it is dependent on your lower time frame. If prices doesn't consolidate, right, it's just keeping onto the bearish market structure, we could expect this zone to break altogether, right? So that's on the weekly. Now, if we move down to the daily, you can see the same thing, right? So on the daily time frame, this is where we are right now. We have this daily zone that's bearish, right? So price broke the previous candle, as you can see here. Let me just zoom in. So you can see that price broke over here, right? So we have a daily resistance region over here, which it's basically this area. So we have this zone, right? So this is where we are right now on the daily. This is the last high that we see, right? So you can see that right at least where we are right now, right? Price has yet to test this region. So nothing much on the daily, right? Pretty much the same thing as what we saw on the weekly. So still in a bearish market structure. Now let's move down to the 4 hours time frame. So on the 4 hours, let me just zoom in further. And so on the 4 hours time frame, this is currently where we are. You can see a support region that price failed to the downside. So on the 4 hours, even if I have to put these levels in close, you can see this area where price tested as a support. It did a pullback and it just broke much lower to the downside, right? So when we see this pullback and price starts breaking to the downside, it creates a region, right, or a potential resistance that we have over here, this area. Right, so this is the 4 hours resistance at the moment, right? So depending on how New York session comes in, right, if we do see a push back into this to test this zone, right, essentially this area as a resistance. And so this is the 4 hour zone that we have. You can see it was the previous support level that failed. So this is the current region that we're looking at, right? So if price comes into this zone, right, test this region, right, this is a potential area. Again, if it pushes into this zone here, right, for any reversal, so two things. When it pushes into this region, right, this low that caused the pullback, it creates a potential target. That's one. And of course, pushing up into this area, if it's not news driven, right, if it's just climbing up slowly into this zone, you can see this bullish market structure coming in again. So any reversal, right, even if price sweeps slightly above it, you can see the reversal usually is accompanied with lower lows and lower highs. Right, so this is where we are right now. This is a potential resistance area, right? So of course, beyond that, we can also use our Fibonacci's, right? So when we talk about Fibonacci's, the idea is basically trying to identify the highest point, right? So swing points, looking at high and lows and trying to identify if there are any Fibonacci retracement levels that lines up with this zone. So take, for example, this, you can see that this whole move to the downside. If we do see a pullback from here, this is our highest point. This is the lowest point, right? So what we can do with this is that we can use a retracement on this. The idea is trying to find if there are any levels that line up with these zones, right? If there is, then in this example, 23.6 lining up with this area, right? So we're not trying to force a level, but if there's any confluence, then that's something that will be aligned with our bias. Right, so that's one. Right, so that's on the 4 hours time frame, right? So if we do see a potential pullback, this is a potential region that we can target. If you want to look for lower time frame confirmation, right, with every pullback, you can see that there will be a change in market structure. So take, for example, right, if we see this pullback, you can see this region that we saw the pullback from, right? So just focusing on this whole area. Now let's go down to the lower time frame. Let's see on the 15 minutes time frame, you can see again, right, this whole structure. We have pushing into this zone. You can see higher lows and higher highs. So this blue area, right, that we have the pullback, right? So let's focus on just this leg itself. What I'm trying to show here is that I'm trying to show that when we are on the lower time frames, right, you can see that confirmation coming in first before it actually signals a reversal on the higher time frame. So with that, right, you can see this zone, right? When price starts pushing into this area, you can again see this structure, right? So higher lows, higher highs over here. And then what happens after is that price broke and closed to the downside. You can see this move, right? Price broke and closed to the downside. And this area, you can see that following that, right, this region then becomes a support and resistance area, this zone here, right? So price broke and closed to the downside. We tested this zone again before it continues much lower, right? The most immediate target, it's basically the low that caused the pull back, right? So basically this low here. Okay, so this is coming from a higher time frame supply, right? So it can be on the 4 hours, it can be on the daily, right? So that's really just looking at the highs and lows of the most recent candles. Okay, so that's on the 4 hours time frame. Now let's take a look at other setups, right? For example, let's take a look at pound dollar, right? So okay, we have requests for pound dollar and dollar franc. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so let's see where we are on pound dollar, right? So if you see pound dollar on the higher time frame first, so if we're on the monthly time frame, you can see this whole zone, right? So prices were in this structure, it's forming higher lows and higher highs. Even if I have to put it on the monthly, you can see here. And what happens after is that we saw this dip pullback to the downside, right? That's on the monthly time frame. If you take a look at the most recent move, right, where we were, right, this whole region, price broke and closed to the downside. We're seeing this area here, which we highlighted as a potential demand, right? You can see this doji, and then following that, we're seeing a strong break to the upside. So again, right, you can see pushing into this demand area, right? We're very bearish, this whole leg itself. And so if I have to highlight this zone, you can see this whole leg is bearish. If I move down to the weekly, if I move down to the daily, we're just seeing lower lows, lower highs to the downside, right? On the daily, on the weekly, right? Pretty much the same things, right? If I put these levels in close, you don't really see much. It's just one straight line down. Right? On the 4 hours, pretty much the same things. So this is where we are right now on pound dollar, which also means that if we do see any reversal, right? So if the assumption is that price comes into this zone on the monthly, and we're seeing some kind of reaction here, pushing into the resistance area, for example, right? Then this reaction, it has to be accompanied with a change in market structure on your lower time frame, right? So with that in mind, right, you can see on the weekly, on the daily, it's not signaling any reversal, right? On the weekly, it's still bearish. But just looking at the most recent price movements, lower lows, lower highs, right? If you take a look at the candles, this is on the weekly. What this shows us is that for that week itself, right, price actually trended lower. So the low of the previous, this week's candle, right? The low of this week's prices, right? It's lower than that of the previous week. So if we take a look at it, it's basically bearish market structure. Okay, so that's on the weekly, right? If we move down to the daily time frame, we're pretty much seeing the same stuff. So over here, so you can see that this zone, right? We have this bearish move to the downside. So what we have over here on the daily, I have to just increase this move, right? So on the daily, what we have is that you can see this region, right? The last daily supply zone that we have comes from this area here. You can see the price broke the previous low. It broke to the downside, right? So if we do see a retest of this zone over here, this area, right? If we see a potential pullback into this daily supply zone, then it creates this low that caused the pullback as a potential target. So that's where we are right now on the daily. Now let's move to the 4 hours time frame. So on the 4 hours time frame, right, this is where we are. So okay, this region, right? So this is interesting. You can see that price starts consolidating around this region, right? So the general trend is still bearish. You can see even with this move, right, we're seeing lower lows and lower highs within this area itself, right? On the 4 hours, it creates a potential supply. You can see price came in, right? It acknowledges the supply, this region, right? And we're seeing a test of this low here. Right, so price came in, acknowledged the supply on the 4 hours, and you're seeing this consolidation. Right, so on the 4 hours time frame, right, following this candle's close, you can see that if price breaks and close above this low, this high, this area here, we can see a deeper pullback. So if price breaks and close above it, right, we could potentially see a deeper pullback into the daily supply zone here. So this is where we are right now on the 4 hours time frame, right? So we're seeing this consolidation depending on how this candle closes, right? If it closes below this 4 hours, right, and 4 hours still turns bearish. If it closes, it's just hovering around this area, fails to close below this, right, then we wait for a break and close to the upside. So on the 1 hour, you can see this is where we are right now on the 1 hour time frame. So again, right, the candle is still forming. Our price action is still forming at the moment. So this region, you can see that we're forming this equal high. So the general direction, at least on the higher time frame, it's still more bearish, right? So if we're waiting for this candle's close, which is in about 1 about 30 minutes, right? So this is in about 30 minutes. If price breaks and close to the upside from here, this move, right, then we can see that this region itself, it could potentially on a 1 hour turn bullish, right? But the break on the 4 hours really comes in here, right? So you can see that on the 1 hour, so the other thing to note is that when you're on the lower time frame, if you're on a 1 hour, 15 minutes waiting for that confirmation, right, that the resistance region, it could be just a wick to the upside before price continues much lower. So this, right, for me, given that this is if we do see any pullback, right, this sits against the general direction of the trend, right? You can see this whole move is just lower lows, lower highs, right? So if we do see any pullback, I want to wait for more confirmation to come in with a break above this high, right? If it goes above that, we can see a potential pullback targeting this daily supply zone on the 4 hours time frame. Okay, so that's I hope that this is clear for you, right? So that's on pound dollar. Now let's take a look at dollar franc, and I have requests for gold as well and cat yen. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so if you take a look at dollar franc, right, again, let's just remove all of this, right? So on the monthly, you can see that we are seeing this strong move to the upside, right? Not much price came in. We're seeing this test of this zone. The price broke and closed below, and then we're just seeing that strong move to the upside, right? So that's on the monthly time frame. Okay, now let's move down to the weekly. So what I'm trying to do here, right? I'm just focusing on this, the most recent movements, right? So I will highlight the key levels that we can potentially look at on the monthly. One would be this zone, right? Just based on how price interacted with this region. You can see a resistance area, price came in, tested as a support, and then again as a resistance here. If I put these levels in close, you can see this region as well, right? Tested multiple times. So this is a potential level to look at, right? But in terms of whether we'll see a strong move to the upside from here, a lot of it is dependent on the lower time frame. If we move to the weekly, you can see this whole move, it's bullish. You're seeing higher lows and higher highs to the upside, right? So this is this whole move here. It's a clear higher lows and higher highs. So this is where we are right now on the weekly time frame. You can see that with the weekly, we're also coming into this potential zone on the weekly. Again, right? As long as the most recent price movement is still bullish, you can see this whole move, right? If I move to the lower time frame, let's say the daily, right? This is still bullish. So there are no signs of acknowledgement of this resistance area. So if price does respect this zone, right, we will see that consolidation before the movement to the downside, which we're not seeing here at the moment, right? Not with the daily or the weekly. You can see that just with the most recent movement, right, this is still bullish. Now, within this whole area itself, right, if you take a look at it on the daily, right, the last support region that we have comes in over here. You can see that price broke and closed to the upside, right? And then we have this test of this zone. So if I were to narrow down, right, ignoring this weekly resistance region, right? So the thought process is that if we are coming into a resistance area, we need to first observe consolidation around this zone. So that's in terms of where we are. If you take a look at it on the daily, right, the most recent region, it's here, right? You can see the price came in, we're seeing that whole higher lows and higher highs being formed. So it creates a potential daily zone here. Now, if we take a look at it on the 4 hours time frame, again, not much. You can see this whole area. So price came in, we see a test of this zone previously, and then right now prices just continues to trend higher. Right now at the moment, right, this whole thing still sticks in, or it still holds in a bullish structure, but in terms of potential setup, right, as of where we are right now, there's no nice setup for me, right, at least on dollar franc. If you take a look at it on the 1 hour time frame, right, you can see that this area, this whole zone where we saw that resistance turn support area, this whole region, right, when price failed and it goes beyond that, right, it created this area here as a support, right? So you still see that consolidation and then price broke to the upside. So it creates this as a potential demand area on the lower time frame. Right? So again, if we do see that pullback into this zone, it creates a short-term high as a potential target, pushing into this zone, right? So a lot of it is still dependent on where we are right now. You can see that if we do see clear lower lows and lower highs to the downside here, right, then that's a potential deeper pullback, right? So that's on dollar franc. Right, now let's take a look at another setup, right, on gold and then also on cat yen. Okay, so let's take a look at that, right? Let's take a look at gold first. So if you take a look at gold on the higher time frames, right, we have a resistance region here. Price came in, tested 3 times. We're seeing a breakout and a retest of this ascending or descending channel descending trend line, right? So breakout retest, you can see price tested as a resistance, broke above it and did a pullback into this zone, right? So that's on the monthly. If you move down to the weekly time frame, right, we highlighted this zone as a potential demand, right? But again, you can see this whole pullback leg that caused the potential demand, right? So again, if price does a pullback into this zone, you'll be seeing very clear lower lows and lower highs to the downside, which we saw on the daily, right? So this whole region over here, right, on the daily, the 4 hours, you can see this whole area, right? So prices are still bearish, right? Previously, we called bearish move on gold, right? Highlighting this resistance area here and also this zone, as you can see, right? And if you take a look at just the most recent price movement, again, you're seeing this bearish structure, lower lows, lower highs to the downside. It created 2 potential resistance region, right? So coming into this zone, again, we're just looking for the change in market structure, right? So let's just observe this movement here, right? So if you take a look at this move, right, if I move down to, let's say, the 1 hour time frame, you can see just putting these levels in close, right, higher lows, higher highs to the downside, and then you can see price starts consolidating, right? So the thought process is that, again, if price continues to push deeper into a supply zone, right, because a lot of it is on hindsight, it could push into this zone, it could push into this region, right, or even this area lying slightly above. So you can see that when price starts consolidating and it starts breaking structure to the downside, the break in structure comes in here. You can see when it breaks and close to the downside here, right, this area, and then pulls back into the test to test it again, right, as a resistance region, right, before it continues much lower. Now, with that in mind, right, let's take a look at where we are here, right? So if you look at it on the 4 hours time frame, this whole area, right, we're still bearish. You're seeing this lower lows and lower highs again form. And if you take a look at it on the 1 hour, right, this is also where we are right now, right? Do note that we have, if you're on the higher time frame, right, this whole zone that we're seeing that consolidation previously, we have this weekly low, right? So if I were to remove all of this whole region, you can see that this area, which we saw that pullback previously, right, we have a low that was being formed over here, right? So this is a potential region, right? If we see that on the lower time frame, right, we're not seeing any kind of change in market structure, we could still see price push lower into this zone, right? So that's where we are on gold on the higher time frame. If we move to the 4 hours time frame, you can see that the most immediate, or rather down to the lower time frame, you can see the most immediate resistance region that we have is this area here. So if price does a pullback into this zone, again, we're waiting for consolidation, targeting this low, right? So that's one potential move over here, right? So not much. You can see that this is where we are, right? If you move down to the lower time frame on the 15 minutes, you can see this consolidation is clearer. And so what we're seeing on the 1 hour, which is basically just one bearish candle. If you look at it on the lower time frame, you're seeing this area where price traded, right, within a range before it broke to the downside, right? If you take a look at it on the 15 minutes, you can see this zone here. So this is the most immediate resistance region for me at the moment, right? So if we do see a pullback into this area, right, this is one region to consider. Okay, so yeah, so that's on the 1 hour time frame. So this whole region, right? So it's this area here. If this is the low that caused the pullback, you can see that again pushing into this zone, right, on the lower time frame. We need that bearish structure in order for confirmation that price is not going deeper into a supply zone that's lying slightly higher, or we could see a potential sweep of this move. Okay, so that's my view on gold, right? I hope that helps. And the last one, it's on CAD Yen. So let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at where we are on CAD Yen, right? Let me just remove all of this. So on the monthly time frame, you can see that we have this potential resistance region coming into this zone, right? But again, pushing into this area, right? This whole move, if you move down to, let's say, the weekly, you can see this is still bullish. Prices are again forming higher lows and higher highs. If you move down to the daily, right, this is the same, right? So not much difference from that. So that's on the monthly, right? So this resistance area. Now let's move down to the weekly. So you can see this whole area. It's in a bullish structure. If you take a look at it on daily time frame, so daily, it's interesting. You can see that this zone, right? So we have this previous move where price broke to the upside. Price moved higher to the upside and then did a pullback. And following that, you can see that prices broke and closed here. So we have this bullish market structure. If you put these levels in close, then this resistance, it's based on the close price, right? So this is where we are. So you can see this region, right? So as long as price holds above this zone, right, it creates still a potential demand on the higher time frame. So let me just keep the demand in blue and the supply in red, right? It's easier for us to see. So here, right? So you can see that just on the daily time frame, we have this high that caused the pullback. So this is the region, right? If you move to the 4 hours time frame, on the 4 hours time frame, right, this is what we have here. So you can see this whole move, right, we are seeing bearish structure, right? Lower lows, lower highs to the downside, and then you're seeing this consolidation here, right? So prices coming in, right, failed to break below this low, tested it multiple times. That's on the 4 hours, right? So you're seeing quite a bit of consolidation over here. And if I were to move down to the lower time frame, let's say down to the 1 hour, again, right, this it's pretty much the same. So if you take a look at this whole move, right, we have lower lows and lower highs to the downside, right? Let's say this move here, you can see that price consolidated within this range. And then right now we're seeing a strong move up. So this, bearing in mind that this is the daily, right? So we have the daily demand area here. So again, what we're waiting for. So if you take a look at it on the daily, right, this is basically what we're seeing. Price broke to the upside, did a pullback, and then it broke and closed to the upside, and currently is testing this demand area. So on the lower time frame, right, if we do see any pullback, right, that pullback has to be a break off structure. So you can see lower lows and lower highs over here. When the price starts consolidating above this zone, right, it creates, so if this candle closes above this zone, this region here, right, creates a potential demand for us here. So if price breaks and close above this region, right, this creates a demand at this area, right? So this is the demand zone, right? So if price comes in and tests this region again, right, again, you'll see that pullback itself, it will be in a bearish structure, lower lows and lower highs, right, before we see that pullback. So I think that right now where we are, right, at least on the 1 hour, you can see that's quite choppy, right, with all the wicks. But if you're on the 4 hours time frame, right, this is slightly clearer. We can see that despite all the wicks, right, price did not actually break and close to the downside, right? It's just currently testing this zone. So that's the demand region on the 4 hours. Okay, so I hope that this helps, right? So if price breaks and close above this, right, creates a potential demand with this high as the target. But of course, if we do see that, right, again, you want to wait for confirmation on your lower time frame. If it does a pullback, you can see that this pullback will be characterized by lower lows and lower highs, and a break of structure to the upside is needed before we see the strong move up. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, right? And yeah, so I believe you're most welcome, Jen. Right, so I believe that's what we have for today, right? And those are all the questions. Okay, so for tomorrow, we will be covering on our educational series, right? So if you want to sign up for that, just go to vantagemarkets.com, educational webinars. Let's go to the schedule. So we are running webinars on a daily basis. For tomorrow, we are covering on trends with price action strategies. Right, so do join us for the session, right? You can sign up for it here. Okay, so if there are no other questions, right, that's what we have, right? You're most welcome, Jamilo, right? Thank you as always for your comments. And so thanks for keeping the session interactive. So that's what we have for today, right? Thanks everyone. Have a great trading week, and we will catch you guys again tomorrow.